Okay, this brings me on to the next menu, which is, I've covered system standard, which is now GPOs. It's quite a simple menu. As I explained earlier, you have 66 physical GPIOs. In here, you can select GPIO 1 number, and that can be a GPI if you want, or a GPO. It's entirely up to you. For pinout information, again, please refer to the install manual. But in here, again, I can rename it to be a different tally. And then on the right side of this menu is your Boolean logic. So it can be, as default, it's normally source now. So when I cut its source, it will fire the GPO as appropriate. But you have different Boolean logic states. So I could use my isolation tallies, not source now. I can use and OR gates. So this now takes me into the protocols menu. In here, this is where I can set up protocols to connect the cooler to any third-party peripheral equipment. To the left of this menu, you can see what loaded protocols will eventually be loaded. Here is your available protocols. Now what the cooler's done is we've listed it into protocol types. So you have tally and UMD. If I change this to router, it shows you all the router protocols, playout for any servers, etc. Editor, if you're connecting to any automation equipment, and then some miscellaneous. So if I want to load a protocol, for example, a router protocol, I could select, for example, SWP08, simply press load. And now that's loaded the SWP08 protocol into my loaded protocols list. Now, you can see activate is orange, means the protocol is not yet active. So I can configure this accordingly. So as default, it's set this particular protocol to be over serial. If I wanted it to be IP, for example, I simply have to go to configure. And I can say here, transport type, I want to be IP client. And then in IP client, I could say, this is the IP address of the router I'm connecting to. Port number, whatever port number you like, simply press apply. And now it's took me back to IP client, how I set it, but yet it's still not activate. So press activate, now it's activated, it's green. This now brings me on to the IP gateways menu. If, for example, my router was on a different network, it's on a different VLAN, then I will need to set up a gateway, hence IP gateways. This is a simple menu. All I need to do is set up two things. Set up the IP address of the gateway, so where you're leaving, hit apply, and the IP address of the destination. For example, the router. Simply input its IP address. Then when it's configured, you put add gateway, and when you have the address in the gateway, it will appear up here, and if it's connected correctly, you'll be able to ping that gateway. So the last menu in the engineering config is the status monitor. This menu gives you a status of all the cards in the mainframe and the panel. So you'll be getting voltages, temperatures, fan speeds, etc. both for the mainframe and the panel. You have a menu here called setup. In the setup menu, you can dictate what the warning message says. So as default, we've given you hardware warning, but you could change this to be call engineering, etc., however you like. Also in here, you have a real-time clock. So if it's not to your time zone, for example, you can adjust it, turn it up, down to your time zone. If you had an NTP server connected to the cooler's mainframe, you could simply edit its IP address, click apply, and it will connect to it. Now, I'm happy with my engineering config. I have my input set up okay, my outputs, my system standard, my protocols, I'm all happy. Now it's time to save. Simply press this up button and you'll go to the top level of the engineering config. To the right hand side, you can, if you want to, turn off specific enables. So for example, I didn't want to save the protocols, I could turn them off. But in this case, in most cases, I want to save everything. So all you simply do is go into the menu Save As, check which project you want to save into. If you remember, I created Project 3 Cooler Training. All I simply do is I can call this Cooler Eng, for example, enter, and I simply press save. Now, if I go back up, I can see I have Cooler Eng saved. And now in this menu, if I wanted to load this at any time, I can load it. Okay, so I'm going to now take you through certain aspects of the user configuration menu that we feel that engineers will also benefit from and will probably set up. So I'm going to start with the crosspoint mapping menu. This crosspoint mapping menu here is a bit special. It has its own menu, but it is saved within the user config. So here you can see there is two tables. I have a user-defined crosspoints and I have fixed crosspoints. Fixed crosspoints are fixed crosspoints. I can't make any changes to these, but they are internal sources. For example, ME outputs, stores, etc. Stuff you probably wouldn't want to change anyway, so we fix them for you. So back to user-defined, these are your user-definable crosspoints, and as default, crosspoint 1 would come into input 1, 2 to 2, 3 to 3, 10, etc. And most of the time, most people would leave them like that because you have ample crosspoints. So you could go down to above your physical inputs and you could select, say, input 51. And if I want to, I could change the field source, key source for that crosspoint. And I could simply go, nope, I want that to be a MAT, an AUX, whatever you want it to be, an ME output. And now that becomes, for example here, crosspoint 51. Where you see 3 question marks to a crosspoint, this is a auto naming feature we have in the cooler. So for example, 3 question marks will tell the display, the mnemonic, to display the input name that we set in the engineering config input setup menu. Now if you remember, if you had router overwrite set to yes, that means the router will tell that name in the input setup menu. This 3 question marks will then put it on this display. Another handy feature for engineers, we feel, is a display status. Now I know, for example, crosspoint 9, input 9, I don't have any video on this. If I put display status to yes, then on my input 9, it's given me a message, no video. So a good way of coming to you, if you lose any video, then your users can tell you. So one last thing of the user configuration crosspoint mapping menu is if you have graphics coming in. So if you have, for example, graphics coming in, your field channel is on 5 and your key alpha channel is on 6, then you need to couple them in this map. So I know graphics field is on 5, so all I need to do is set the key source here to be 6. Now, when your users want to do a Luma coupled key, then the coupled key knows to process it how you've mapped it here. So that's the end of the crosspoint mapping menu. This brings me on to your user configuration menu. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the AUX setup menu. If you remember, in the eng-config output setup menu, the cooler's outputs are all AUX outputs. And also in that menu, we configured how many DSKs we wanted to use. Now in this menu, the user config AUX setup menu, this is where we say which outputs we want the DSK. So where do we want our downstream keyer? So, for example, I could select output 1, I want to set DSK to follow my program. That means it will follow what the user is selecting. If I want to have it permanently on, I can select on. Go back to off. Multiple select means instead of having to go through every single input, I can say, right, I want DSK to follow my program for all of my outputs. I want the DSK1 to be on for all of my outputs. So this is where you configure that. Also in this menu, you can assign and configure your fade to black if needed. And here you can set your profile and then the shape, it will go to black. This now brings me on to the user config aux buses menu. Now, in this simple menu, this is where you assign what you want on that aux bus. So, for example here, I have selected aux 1. Now I can lock these, so for safety, if you don't want any of your users or anyone else accidentally routing the wrong sources output, you can lock them, or you can unlock them, and you can choose which cross point you want on that aux output. So simply, you can cycle through, or you can do your pop-up, in my case, say ME2 output 1, this program. And these can be any cross point you want, so you could put a store to it, for example. And this is saved in the user config. Okay, so the last menu we feel an engineer would benefit from in the user config is the multi-viewer menu. Now it takes you automatically to the tiles menu, but I think the first menu you need to be in is this setup menu. So we have 4 heads and we have a maximum of 16 tiles. So in this menu is I can set my tile allocation. So for example, I could set, say if I wanted 12 tiles on here, I could either turn that round, I could do pop-up 12, enter, and say head 2, I want my 4 tiles. That means I've got 2 multi-viewer heads, one with 12, one with 4 tiles. So also in this menu, I have a number of presets we've built for you. So for example, I could choose this 12. And then this brings me to the tiles menu. In this menu, this is where I can select what sources I want on each tile. So if I just cycle through this preset, it automatically follows, the delegate will follow. So if I want this one, for example, it's taking me to tile 3, and I could say, what source do I want? It's got input 1 on it. I say, no, I want, for example, store 1 to be on that. And then this layout is all saved in the user config. So as an engineer now, I'm happy with this, so now I want to save my user config that my users could edit at a later date. So simply press up. Okay, if you remember, I created Project 3 Cooler training. So all I have to do is, I'm happy with my enables, simply go to Save As, pick any slot I want, and I could name this Cooler User. Enter. And then simply press Save. If I want to make a few adjustments, for example, I might want to change something in the multi-viewer layout, for example, and then instead of saving a new file, I want to keep it in there, I can simply press Overwrite, Yes, Overwrite. And then it will always give you the date and time of your last save.